Hi there, this is Chris, and we are taking a look at SAT Practice Test 1. This is the paper version of the test, where you do have the longer passages with the larger question sets than what you might see on a digital SAT, but still great reading comp review material. So even if you're planning on taking a digital SAT, hopefully this is really good as a skill builder. So here we're in the reading section, section 1. And it says questions 1 through 10 are based on the following passage. So for this particular video series, we're going to go through the answers and a quick passage review, but the expectation is that you have already read the passage. So if you would like, go ahead and pause the video. If you have access to the test, great. If not, I'll scroll through so you can see the first part of the passage here. Pause it here as you read that, and then if you want to move on to the next portion of the passage, let me zoom out a bit so you can see all of it. Your passage ends here. So pause at those key parts if you want to go ahead and read the passage now, or read it on your own with your own copy of the exam. But we are going to talk through and discuss both the passage and the questions with the expectation that this is something you've already read. All right, so let's dive into it. First things first, as with any passage, if they give you a little blurb at the beginning, then you should definitely read that. Why is that really important? Well, two reasons. One is that every passage that you see will likely be an excerpt from a larger work. So there are occasionally more alternative passages where you have a short poem or something where they can, show the entire work, but usually on reading comp passages and question sets, you're going to be looking at an excerpt, which means you're not always starting at the beginning. So that little blurb can do wonders for providing us with context. It also, on a passage like this, is going to introduce some of the key characters and relationships so that we have an idea of who's who before we start. So here, they tell us the author, the title of the work, the year, and it even gives us a little synopsis of what's going on. It says, the setting is Japan in 1920. Chi and her daughter Naomi are members of the House of Fuji, a noble family. Okay, so we have location, we have character introduction. Chi and her daughter, we know their relationship, mother-daughter, and it says they're members of House of Fuji, a noble family. So I often ask my students to pause here and think about what we might expect that to be like based on the time period, based on the location, based on the information given. And oftentimes the types of adjectives that students describe this family with, they say wealthy or sophisticated or classy or formal. And because of the time period, 1920, so compared to modern day evaluation of the way that people are likely to speak or behave, they say things like that they might be more proper or maybe a little bit more reserved in their viewpoints and things like that. So a lot of those adjectives are great, and that shows that students, when they do read just this tiny little blurb, are getting great insight into a passage. So here, as we go through, basic plot reminder, assuming again this is something you've already read, but Akira is a young man and he attends Kobe Dental College. He shows up at their house, at the House of Fuji. He shows up. It's a winter's eve. In this paragraph, they describe there's bad weather outside. He knocks on the door. It's kind of late at night. He asks to speak with the mother, and they have this conversation. He approaches her very formally, and he's telling her that he has this opportunity to go be a dentist for Seattle's Japanese community. And she says, congrats, but I'm not sure how I'm involved. And then later it gets into the detail as to why he's there. And this is a big piece of it that sometimes students overlook, but he says, I've come to ask for Naomi's hand. So that means hand in marriage. So he's there to propose, to ask for familial approval. But as they highlight in the passage, he hasn't maybe done this in the most traditional way. He's stepping a little bit outside of typical tradition for the time and place and familial rank, and he's going and asking himself because he's under a little bit of time pressure since he has to make this decision about whether or not to take this job in Seattle. And so she asks if Naomi knows, and he says that they have an understanding, which means that she does. And so it goes on for him to go through the process of asking, and then she comes back inside, and from there till the end of the passage, she and Naomi talk, and Chi's a little flustered and surprised by the whole thing, but Naomi says, "Mother, I mean to have him," where she's really asserting herself in terms of what her intentions are as a response. So that's the basics that we want to make sure that we understood from this passage. If you read the passage and maybe had a totally different idea of what was going on, then take that plot summary, keep it in mind, maybe reread the passage and see if we can have a better understanding. Okay, so with that, let's dive into the questions. So here, which choice best describes what happens in the passage? So this is talking about the passage as a whole. So this is a general question. And for a general question, we don't have to look back into the passage. In fact, we probably want to avoid that because that oftentimes means that we're going to maybe look to something too specific for what we're trying to find for a general answer. So if we take a look through our answer choices here, one character argues with another. So we want to avoid those skewed or extreme answer choices that are too strongly worded. And here, there's argues and intrudes. Both of those words are a little bit misleading for what's actually happening in their interaction. One character discusses a possibility with another character, but argue is overly negative. Intrudes is overly negative. So those overstate the negative aspect of this relationship. Now here, for answer choice B, one character receives a surprising request from another character. Well, that's true. So it was surprising for Chi, and it's always good to see if you can justify that. So how do we know that it's surprising? Well, if we look, it was so surprising, but how am I involved tells us Chi didn't even know that this was coming. This wasn't something that she had any idea, and they in fact tell us she had no idea. So there are plenty of concrete clues, and that's one thing when you are working on your reading comp skills, we always, if we can, want to avoid words like, or generalities like that kind of wasn't a great answer, or this one sounded a little better, or that one made more sense, because that's hard for us to take action on to improve our score in the section. So if you're able to show concretely why an answer choice is supported, or concretely why a particular answer choice is incorrect, then you're going to be in good shape. But B seems pretty on point for now. Let's take a look at our other choices. So here, one character reminisces about choices she has made over the years. That would be like if Chi were looking into her own past, and that's not what we see here at all. She's dealing with a current situation right in front of her, not reviewing something from a previous time. And for D, one character criticizes another character for pursuing an unexpected course of action. So a lot of people get tripped up here because they see the unexpected and they get excited because they go, yeah, unexpected. That's kind of like surprised, right? I have evidence to support that this whole thing was unexpected. But again, we see one of those skewed or extreme pieces of wording here when they say criticizes another character. She's a little taken aback. She's a little flustered, but she doesn't criticize Akira for pursuing this action. That's overly negative for the actual tone of the passage. And we can then confidently pick B and move on. Let's take a look at 2. Which choice best describes the developmental pattern of the passage? A careful analysis of a traditional practice, detailed depiction of a meaningful encounter, definitive response to a series of questions, a cheerful recounting of an amusing anecdote. Okay, so first one that I see students eliminate here tends to be answer choice C. And that's a great elimination, and let's take a look at why. Here it says a definitive response. So if a student does fall for this one, I usually ask the follow-up question of, did they end up getting married? And the answer to that, based on this passage, is we don't know. So when they say a definitive response, that is something that we can prove incorrect by the fact that we don't know what the next step is. It stops with mother, yes, I mean to have him, but we don't know if she ends up saying, okay, I understand, you can say yes, or if she says, absolutely not, our family is not going to agree to this, and you must say no. We don't know the outcome, so we can't say that we have a definitive response. How about for a careful analysis of a traditional practice? So obviously the traditional practice that they're potentially referring to here would be the practice of marriage. And again, these are great exercises, but if you fall for a particular incorrect answer choice, hey, no worries. These are written to be tempting. I'm going to tell you in advance, this one's going to be incorrect. Let me ask a question if you did fall for this one. Tell me a little bit in detail about the traditional practice of marriage in Japan, in Japanese culture, in the 1920s, for noble families. What are some of those specifics of that tradition? And oftentimes students get a little stumped and say, well, I don't know all the specifics. And here, if this were in fact a careful analysis of that practice, we should know the specifics. So careful analysis of a traditional practice, or careful analysis of marriage, we don't know enough specifics based on the information here. They do tell us a couple things. They say, well, you're supposed to have your family ask the other family on your behalf. So we maybe know one or two things, but we don't know a lot. And remember, they're talking about developmental pattern of the passage. Again, a general question here. This is about the passage as a whole. So for those general questions, if they're asking about passage as a whole, it better be something in our correct answer that we saw throughout the passage as a whole. Here, a detailed depiction of a meaningful encounter. Well, let's see, because obviously it's a meaningful encounter. You're asking your girlfriend's mother for her hand in marriage. That's a pretty big deal. That's very meaningful. Let's see if we have some detail. And I'll tell you right now, this is a pretty good indication of our detail. Look at all those quotes. Open quote, open quote, open quote, open quote, open quote, open quote. More quotes, more quotes, more quotes. Which means that there's definitely depiction of some detail here, a detailed depiction of this encounter. And we can tell that it's detailed because of how many quotation marks there are. They're giving us the actual dialogue, the word for word conversation. You ever have a friend who maybe tells a story who's a little long-winded? That friend is usually me among my friend group. But that's something that you can see if somebody says, hey, I saw Joe at the store yesterday. There are people who just say that and that's the end. That's not a very detailed depiction. But we've all got those friends who say, I saw Joe at the store yesterday and I said, hey, Joe, how's it going? And then he said, and then I said, and then he said, and they go back and forth and they give you word by word, play by play of the entire conversation. That's what we see in this passage, which means that is definitely reflective of a detailed depiction of this encounter. Now for D, a lot of people say, I don't know whether or not this was a cheerful recounting of an amusing anecdote, because I don't know what anecdote means. And I usually say that's okay. Anecdote is, just your own kind of personal story or tale, but the cheerful recounting part is what I tend to follow up with there. Where do we see language that indicates that this is cheerful? And again, part of what we want you to take away from this analysis is how to go back and interpret questions on your own. So for this passage analysis, we're going to go through this in some detail, and it'll be a little technical, but if you want to fast forward from one question to the next, feel free. But here, what we want to ask ourselves is, where can I actually find this in the passage? What kind of words would indicate a cheerful recounting? So if I'm recounting something, again, that indicates that maybe it's something that happened in the past that I'm now remembering or now discussing. And we don't see that past tense used. We see this as present tense. They're talking about what's happening right now. So there's not really a recounting, but for the cheerful part, that's usually easier for potential test takers who might have fallen for this question to go back and revisit and concretely identify examples of or a lack of example of. And in this case, words that would indicate a cheerful recounting would be if she fondly looked upon a situation enjoyably, happily, gladly, excitedly. So we're looking for a lot of that positive connotation, and we don't see much of that. We see a tiny hint. So it says here, she felt herself starting to like him. We see a tiny hint, and a lot of my students refer to that when they say, well, that sounds cheerful, that sounds positive, but again, this is a general question about the developmental pattern of the passage as a whole. When you're looking at the passage as a whole, you're looking for an answer choice that reflects what happened in the passage at large, not what might have been mentioned just one time in one individual line. So make sure we're very careful about that. The best way to avoid something too specific is to avoid looking back for those broad questions. All right, let's take a look at 3. As used in line 1 and line 65 directly, most nearly means. Well, let's see how it's used in line 1 and 65. Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. And you know what? This is going to start to get messy, so I'm going to go ahead and erase some of these other marks so that we can just focus on the question at hand as we go through. Make sure that we're able to keep it simple. All right, so here, let's clean this up a little. All right, now we'll go back through. So for 3, line 1 and line 65, we're looking at the word directly. Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Was that it? Had he followed form? Had he asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between, would she have been more receptive? So here, what they're saying is that by coming directly, he didn't use the go-between, which means that directly might mean by himself or without a go-between. Let's see how it's used in line 65 a little later. I ask directly because the use of a go-between takes much time. So again, they're making reference to this idea of some sort of go-between, some representative who in normal customary standards might have come on your behalf. Let's see for 3 what they say for our answer choices. Frankly, confidently, without mediation, and with precision. Well, without a go-between would be a mediator. So without mediation is definitely our correct answer choice here. I will point something out, and I hear this time and time again, surprisingly commonly, is that students say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. When I saw that one, I thought it said without meditation. I hear that time and time again, and it's surprising that a slight misread like that would be so common amongst a wide variety of students, but it is. And that just highlights the idea that when you are going through answer choices, words matter and even individual letters matter. Just make sure you're very careful. It's so easy to develop bad test-taking habits in response to the time pressure. A lot of times, just because that clock is running, we start misreading things, or in the math sections, for example, having miscalculations. So just be ultra careful as you're reading through, especially answer choices like this, where it's just one word or maybe 2 words for an answer choice. That means that the actual meaning of each of those words is going to matter more significantly. Be extra careful as you go through these. All right, up next is question 4. Here, which reaction does Akira most fear from Chi? So this one, a lot of people tend to miss, but I want to point something out. It says, which reaction does Akira most fear? We're looking for what Akira fears on this. And too often, when people miss this one, they point out something that might have been what Chi said. And it's very easy to mix up who's who, especially when you have ongoing dialogue. Because you'll see here that a lot of times it'll say something like this. If you look at the bottom left where it says, I think you should go, said Naomi. It's a little bit easier to keep track of. But then sometimes when you have the back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, it's a little bit easier to get lost. So here, for example, you have, like these couple paragraphs. Come inside, get out of this nasty night. Surely your business can wait for a moment or two. I don't want to trouble you. Normally I would approach you more properly, but I've received word of a position. This is a pretty long segment where they don't have the name of who's speaking in every line. So it's easy to flip-flop which character is which. So just be really careful there. We're looking for something that Akira is experiencing. And 4 happens to be, if we take a sneak peek, you see this structure for question 5. 4 happens to be a question that's linked to 5. If they're asking for the best evidence for the answer to the previous question, then whatever answer choice we find as correct for 4, we want to make very sure that we have something that is concrete justification for it. And when we look at 4, so is Akira afraid that she'll consider his proposal inappropriate? Maybe. That she will mistake his earnestness for immaturity? Maybe. That she will consider his unscheduled visit an imposition? Maybe. That she will underestimate the sincerity of his emotions? Maybe. This is a pretty tough one, which is why those lines that we see in 5 are so advantageous, because we want to see which of these might concretely point us to the correct answer for 4. You can use this to work backwards, and in fact, for really difficult questions, it's a great tool. Great strategy. So let's try that here. Let's check line 33. So here it says, his soft voice was refined. I'm sorry, his voice was soft, refined. Okay. So here his voice was soft and refined. All right, let's see. Does that clue us in to what his fears are? Whether it's going to be inappropriate, whether he's immature, whether she's going to consider his visit an imposition, whether she's going to underestimate his emotions. If you have a soft, refined voice, well, that doesn't really indicate fear at all, actually. If his voice is soft, I think when I'm afraid, my voice might sound a little shaky or, erratic or something along those lines. So soft, refined actually indicates that he's not experiencing fear, which means that doesn't help us find the answer to 4, but it does give us enough cause to eliminate answer choice A for 5. Let's take a look at B, lines 49 through 51. So here, the end of this column, it says, you know how children speak so earnestly, so hurriedly, so endearingly about things that have no importance in an adult's mind. And even that next line kind of reiterates the same sentiment, which is that's how she viewed him as a child. Okay, so this is talking about how Chi views Akira. Now, if we look at question 4, and this happens very commonly on this one, we see students gravitate towards this answer choice of she will mistake his earnestness for immaturity. And that word stands out because we see childlike, we think immaturity, child, they go hand in hand. That one supports it. But that's where I try to re-emphasize as much as possible. Bring it back to which character is which. The question is asking us about what Akira feels. These lines are talking about Chi's experience. They're talking about how she is viewing him, not what he is feeling or fearing, but what she's thinking. So that's gonna allow us to eliminate answer choice B in question 5. And unless there's a different justification set of lines for answer choice B, it's probably not going to be answer choice B for 4. I'm not sure yet, so I'm going to say maybe not, for this one. So this one's probably going to be a big question mark unless we have some other justification elsewhere in the passage. that was probably a tempting answer choice that was written with the hope that a test taker might fall for that close but incorrect justification based on the way this question's worded. All right, let's check these other lines, 63 and 64. Please, all the way up to proposal. So that's in here where it says, please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. Well, let's see who's saying that. So here, in the previous lines, it says, suddenly Chi felt the dampness of the night. So that means Chi is speaking here. And then there's a response given, which means this is Akira speaking here in these quotes. Anytime they switch quotes and they indent to a new paragraph, that means it's a change of speaker. So we're changing from Chi to Akira. So please don't judge my candidacy. Please don't judge me. Please don't judge me. That does indicate some fear. And what is he fearful of? He's fearful that she's going to consider his proposal inappropriate. He's afraid that she's judging his candidacy. When they say candidacy, they're referring to whether or not he'd be a good husband. And here, he's nervous that she's not going to like that proposal. That absolutely matches, and it is going to be answer choice C for 5, definitively supporting answer choice A for question 4. And we don't even have to worry about answer choice D for number 5 or any other answer in question 4. That is a clear link and a clear supporting piece of evidence justifying a correct answer to that previous question. Let's take a look at our last few here. So for 6, in the passage, Akira addresses Chi with. So we see this structure, and we're likely going to have maybe somewhat conflicting words here when they say but not. So here they're going to try to present an idea and then maybe tone it down, or present an idea and then maybe switch it a little. So affection but not genuine love. Objectivity but not complete impartiality. Amusement but not mocking disparagement. Respect but not utter deference. So here we see we've got not the extreme version, right? But not. This is talking about what's extreme compared to the actual more accurate description. So that's where we see that we're going to have this maybe tempered or toned down version of an idea. So does Akira address Chi with affection? So let's talk about some of the meanings of words here. Does he address Chi in a positive way, a kind way, potentially a formal way, a respectful way? Sure. So there's some, idea of positivity there. Affection, though. So the meaning of affection is going to be something that we would show towards someone we know well, a loved one. There can be affection in the sense of a more intimate relationship. There could also be affection that you have for a close friend. But affection is a little bit outside of the scope for what Akira is actually experiencing with Chi, because they don't know each other. So it's hard to treat a brand new stranger with affection. They don't know each other, and there's not enough affection in the story. And again, if that's one you fell for, my question would be, great, show us the evidence. Where do you see words that indicate affection in the way that Akira is addressing Chi? Objectivity but not complete impartiality. Again, this is a character switch. Tempting answer choice. Chi is responding to this particularly surprising request with some degree of objectivity. She's trying to be fair. She's not slamming the door in his face. She's not saying, oh, that's so great, of course you can marry my daughter, and giving him a big hug. She's somewhere in between. She's kind of neutral in her response. She's a little taken aback, but she's still respectful of the situation. So that's a great description of what she is addressing Akira with, but it's not what they're asking, right? Keep in mind who is who. How does Akira address Chi? We're looking for something that shows what Akira is doing here. Amusement. So is he addressing her with amusement? Again, no. Absolutely not. He's trying to be as proper and convincing and mature and formal and respectful as he can. And he is absolutely respectful. We can say for sure That's true on D. And then they say, but not utter deference. A lot of students aren't familiar with deference, and I always put it into the college conversation. What does it mean if somebody defers an acceptance? So think about that in context, because here, when they're talking about deference, they're talking about acquiescing to and basically, saying an absolute, Chi, whatever you say, like, you're the best. I'm not going to, challenge you in any sort of way, right? That would be utter deference. But how come it's not utter deference? Because remember, this is the contrast. They're saying not utter deference. Well, remember, towards the end here, both Akira and Naomi have some places where they actually show a little strength. He says, all right, here's how it's going to go, right? In these lines here, let me point them out. So he gives her an ultimatum, which is pretty bold, right? If you think showing up in the middle of the night, knocking on the door, in the middle of a storm, and giving your potential mother-in-law an ultimatum as to whether or not she's going to approve of you asking for her daughter's hand in marriage the very first time that you meet her. So that's a really bold thing to do. And he's not bowing down. He says, if you give your consent, here's what's going to happen. I become Naomi's Yoshi. We'll live in the house of Fuji. If you don't, I must go to America to secure a new home for my bride, which basically he's saying, if you don't say yes, that's fine. I'm going to go to Seattle. I'm going to take this job, and I'm going to get a home for my bride, and Naomi's going to come with me. So either you say yes, or I'm taking her, all the way, across the world pretty much to Seattle. So that's a big deal, right? That's a bold statement on his part. So that's where we see that it's not utter deference. He is being respectful, but he's not just fully acquiescing to what Chi might want. He is still asserting himself. All right, the main purpose of the first paragraph is to, let's revisit that first paragraph. It's just a few lines. It says, Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Was that it? Had he followed form? Had he asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between? Would she have been more receptive? Okay. So if we take a look, what's the purpose of that? Well, we see that Akira is the one talking here, questioning, wondering. And a lot of people say, hey, I saw some questions. So it's got to be question a suggestion. But let's see what he's really questioning. Let's see what he's really wondering about. And the key line from that first paragraph is, would she have been more receptive? So Akira is wondering about Chi's response. Would her response be improved if he had followed all these traditional steps? Let's see what answer choice matches that idea. Is he describing a culture there? No. Is he criticizing a tradition? No, some people fall for that because it mentions the word tradition and they think, oh, well, they, kind of talked about that parental involvement in asking for someone's hand in marriage. That sounds like tradition, but they're not criticizing it. Again, question. That's a big one here. A lot of people just gravitate towards answer choice C because it says the word question. But what suggestion would be questioned here? They don't allude to any type of suggestion. That's not going to be it. But analyze a reaction, yes. He's analyzing Chi's reaction. He's thinking about, oh, should I have done it this way? Would she be more receptive if I went the traditional route? I might have made a bad move here, I'm not sure. So he's thinking about Chi's reaction to the request for Naomi's hand. In question 8, as used in line 2, form most nearly means. Well, let's see what they're referring to when they mention form in line 8. So that's going to be down here a bit, and it says, in line 2. It's question 8, line 2. There we go. So it says, had he followed form, and then look, they gave us an em dash and follow up with a positive phrase here that lets us know exactly what they're describing. Everything after that dash tells us what they mean when they say form. It says, had he asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between. So that's the piece that is descriptive of the word form prior to the dash. Okay, well, had he asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between, like, is that an appearance? No. Is that a custom? Well, yeah, we talked about it a little bit. That's one of those customs or, parts of that tradition in that 1920s formal Japanese culture for, the way that you might ask for the hand of marriage for someone of a noble family. They're describing this is the customary way to do it. So that fits. Structure? Nature? No, absolutely not. It's the custom. This is the way it was done. This is what was customary or part of that marriage process at that time. All right. For 9, why does Akira say his meeting with Chi is a matter of urgency? So this one's very concrete, and hey, there's our friend. Evidence-based justification questions. So on number 10, they're asking for the evidence. That means that we can pick an answer to 9, and we are going to have very concrete evidence to support it. And a lot of students are able to go ahead and answer 9 on this. A lot of students even remember this. If you don't, that's okay. You can always look back. But here, matter of urgency in line 32. Well, let's look at some context. It says here, I come with a matter of urgency. And then let's see what he says. After that, why is it urgent? So here, this is just descriptive. We don't have detail as to the urgency. But then just a few lines down, if we're trying to figure out why it's urgent, it says here that he's got this opportunity to go to America as a dentist for Seattle's Japanese community. So that's why it's urgent. He found out he's got a job opportunity. He's got to say yes or no to the job. So a lot of students get this one without having to look back. It is helpful to look back and make sure the context supports what you're thinking that it is. But yes, here he has been offered an attractive job in another country. And those lines are the lines that we just looked at that we see in 39 to 42, where he talks about having this position as the dentist for Seattle's Japanese community. And so that wraps up our question set for this passage. Again, take a look at the way that you analyze your own questions. The best advice I can possibly give for improving reading comp skills on the whole is to try to find both specific and concrete reasons why a particular answer is correct or why a particular answer is incorrect. It does not serve you well to just look at a correct answer when glancing over a passage that you've already done and say, oh, I get it. Oh, yeah, all right, fine. That one's kind of better. That one makes a little more sense. This one wasn't as good. That very general, very ambiguous language is going to allow your reading comp skills to remain stagnant, which we do not want. Really specific, targeted, concrete language as to why we might have missed a question or even why we got something right for the right reasons. That's where you're going to change the way that you truly read and interpret the passages in front of you for test day. So stay tuned to